SpectreVision Radio.
Welcome to the Caribbean Mystics podcast, where the veil between the worlds is thin. I'm your host, Gabrielle. I explore the true supernatural stories born from our island's unique blend of mysticism, superstition, and lore. These are real accounts from real people, and the encounter you're about to hear might just be from your very own backyard. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Caribbean Mystics podcast. Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. I am super excited to be here. It is February. We are in, what is this? This is going to be our sixth episode of the season. I can't believe how fast time is going. But also completely not surprised because time flies when, what do you say? Time flies when you're having fun. And so today, as you can see, we are doing another Caribbean Mystics deep dive. It is an opportunity for you and I to explore facets of Caribbean history, mythology, legend, lore, superstition in a way that isn't necessarily packaged into a story. There are always these topics that I want to hit on, but I haven't gotten a story for the topic. And so I am using these little deep dive opportunities so that way I can explore these concepts with you because I find them particularly fascinating. And today we're going to be talking about a wildly misunderstood concept that has taken the world by storm, but has been deeply, deeply distorted. And this is going to be the story of the zombie. A lot of people don't realize that the zombie's origins are deeply rooted in the Caribbean and actually take us to Haiti, which during colonial times was called Saint Dominique. And it was one of the most brutal slave colonies in the Caribbean. And I feel like it's super important for me off the cuff to say that Saint Dominique, with all of its brutality and all of its cruelty, would end up being the first place in the Western Hemisphere where enslaved people were able to liberate themselves, which is an action that would continue to cause the Haitian people to this day to have to repay back for their own liberation. And we saw that because they were paying France up until 2016, 2017 back for the fact that they had liberated themselves. And France, for whatever reason, felt like it was entitled to receive some sort of like repayment for that, which I think is just so deeply grotesque. And I can't believe that system of repayment was allowed to continue on for so long. But it's one of the many reasons why Haiti is so largely misunderstood. There's a lot of people who are just like, oh, Haiti is such an unstable place and its government and, like it's so unsafe. And I don't think a lot of people, especially a lot of people who are not in the Caribbean, really acknowledge the fact that Haiti was never given a true shot at success and prosperity. Like when you look at the United States and how it's occupied Haiti and how it has worked alongside other European powers to destabilize Haiti. The United States, there are so much evidence of the United States overthrowing their elections and impeding their democratic process. You look at the Bill Clinton Foundation after the earthquake that happened in Haiti. Bill Clinton and his foundation went in there and there was a whole bunch of like corruption and the help never actually went to where it said it was going. And there's just a whole bunch of stuff connected to that. I highly suggest you do your research. Not to mention when France was using the Haitian land to be able to create all of these like crops during the time of slavery, they were not good stewards of the land, and so they did not do what they needed to do for like crop rotation, and so what they did was that they essentially stripped the land of so much of its nutrients. And so there is a way in which it has stymied agriculture on the island in certain places since slavery. And so there's just a lot of there's a lot of history attached to Haiti, and it is an honor to be able to sit today and to give them a lot of credit for the concept of the zombie and for us to go back to the original roots of the zombie because it's actually such a statement about what we fear. And sometimes there are fears that are even more potent than the fear of death. And the story of the zombie is essentially that. So let's get into it. When you think of the word zombie, you're thinking about the undead, you're thinking about a mindless person who has an insatiable appetite for like human flesh and distan ara. But the original interpretation of the zombie was a bit different. This concept of the zombie dates back to the 17th and 18th century on the island of Haiti. Zombies are significant yet singular aspects of Haitian folklore. They're akin to the westernized concept of the boogeyman or even vampires. The nocturnal world of Haitian legends is populated with a lot of different entities. You have the Loup-garou, you have some of these shapeshifter energies that are constantly woven into their legends. And among these are also hairless pigs, which are believed to be the incarnations of powerful secret societies that patrol the nights. And within this landscape, with all of these mythical creatures, you see the zombie, which is a deeply intertwined concept with cultural beliefs that were inherited from Africa. The Haitian word zanbi is believed to derive from the Kikongo word zumbi, which translates to soul or spirit of the dead. The origin the origin highlights a profound Haitian fear of soul theft, a fate believed to be worse than death itself. Now, this concept of soul death is one that we see across the Caribbean. We have different superstitions, like pregnant women should not go to cemeteries because the soul that is currently their fetus is newly connected to that body and therefore is not anchored to that human incarnation. And so it is very easy for a powerful spirit or a spirit that has some sort of unresolved whatever to almost push that spirit out of its vessel and to take it over. It is kind of similar to like demonic possession, but demonic possession infers that the spirit that is taking over the body is inherently evil, and that is not always necessarily the case. Now, one of the fascinating aspects about zombies is that while we in the Western Hemisphere may perceive it to be some sort of fantastical, sensationalized idea that is just, what's been fueled by nightmares, there are a lot of people in Haiti that really do believe that this is a true concept. And in fact, there was a man who lived in a village that was in the center of Haiti. And one day he goes up to a woman named Angelina Narcisse, and he identifies himself as her brother, Clairvius. He introducing himself as Clairvius, which was his boyhood nickname, and he was able to mention facts only intimate family members knew in order to show her that he was in fact her brother. And apparently, 18 years prior, she stood in a small cemetery north of her village and watched that very same brother, Clairvius, buried. The man told Angelina he remembered the night that he was buried very well. And he knew that when he was lowered into his grave, he was fully conscious, but he was unable to speak or move. And as the earth was thrown over his coffin, he felt like he was floating over his grave. So there was a moment in time where he identifies that his soul did, in fact, leave its body. The scar on his right cheek, he said, was caused by a nail that was driven into his casket. So that night when he was buried, he told his sister that a voodoo priest was able to raise him from his grave. He was beaten with a sisal whip and was carried off to a sugar plantation in northern Haiti, where other zombies were forced to work as slaves. Only with the death of the zombie master were they able to escape, and Narcisse eventually returned home. Legend has it that the zombies are the living dead and they raised from their grave by a voodoo sorceress, sometimes called a bokor, usually for some sort of evil purpose. At the time when Clairvius reappeared in the 1980s, two women also turned up to other villages saying that they too were zombies. In the same year in northern Haiti, the local peasants claimed to have found a group of zombies working aimlessly in the fields. But Narcisse's case was different in one crucial aspect, and that is that it was documented. On April 30th, 1962, hospital records showed that Narcisse walked into the hospital's emergency room spitting up blood. He was feverish and he was full of aches, and his doctors could not diagnose what his illness was, and his symptoms grew steadily over time. 3 days after he entered the hospital, according to records, he died, and the attending physicians, who had an American among them, signed his death certificate. His body was placed in cold storage for 20 hours, and then he was buried. He said he remembered hearing his doctors pronounce him dead, while his sister wept by his bedside. Now, this concept of the zombie is one that is also deeply fascinating because we see that it has shifted over time. And part of this shift happened during the United States occupation that happened in the early 1900s. And when the United States brought people to Haiti, this included filmmakers and people that were writers. They got really invested into the concept of the zombie. Except what they ended up doing was they repackaged it. And we see that in different early works. So, like in 1932 with the film White Zombie, which showed a story of a Haitian bokor who was a villain. And the central horror was that a white woman was being turned into a zombie. And so the film tapped directly into a racist colonial fear, which was the fear of the primitive other, the fear of black magic that would end up corrupting white innocence. And as you can imagine, this fear would go on to fuel a whole bunch of literary works that actually took the concept of the zombie and removed it from its original origins, which was the fear of the loss of the Haitian soul. One scholar would go on to say that this was a neocolonialist act of symbolic re-enslavement. It was a powerful belief system that was stripped of its context and turned into a proper racist nightmares. Hollywood ran with it, and for decades, zombies in film were largely seen as mindless slaves under the control of a master, and it often exoticized voodoo, which we know is an African belief system that it's pervasive throughout the Caribbean. The horror was one of control and racialized anxiety, while the profound tragedy of a stolen self was also lost in translation. The authentic spiritual belief was buried under layers and layers and layers of colonial fantasy. Now, in 1968, something started to shift with how people perceived zombies. And this happened with Dawn of the Dead, which was a film that was released by George Romero, who also did Night of the Living Dead. And while he severed the zombie from its Haitian roots and from the Bokor and from spell work, he created a storyline that prioritized the fears that were growing among the general population of being lost and not being able to control yourself because of externalized factors. A good example of this is that his one movie took place inside of a shopping mall. And the fear was that we were no longer fearful of foreign magic, but of our own society that was turning us into mindless consumers. There was a loss of individuality, it was a faceless mob, and a system that was set to consume us. So the modern concept of the zombie, while stripped of its cultural origins, actually in a strange way brought us back to the original concept. It this fear of like pandemics and social breakdown and becoming just another nameless body in a swarm essentially underscores the fear of a person being gone, being removed from their desires and their hopes and their dreams, and being pushed almost like cattle to slaughter. So I look at the concept of the zombie, and I actually find it to be particularly intelligent, the fear of losing oneself. Now, in its original context, this was connected to magic and the fact that there are certain incantations and spells that could resurrect the dead. We also see the concept of resurrection with, like, of course, the resurrection of Jesus Christ in the Bible. We also see it in the story of Osiris, right? In ancient Egypt's Egyptian mythology. And that too is also connected to a level of like spell work and manifestation. And so I will say I'm not going to be so skeptic, to be honest, because I do think that there might be something here. There's also this whole thing around like the Maccabee Bible, where it is all of this spell work that has the capacity to resurrect the dead. Of course, a lot of spiritualists warn against this type of magic. It's considered to be dark magic, and it's considered to be incredibly destructive when not controlled. And it creates a whole bunch of like karmic debt and stuff because you're interrupting with someone's free will, you're interrupting with somebody's destiny. And there's always going to be a price to pay for that type of magic. But there's a lot of people that believe in it, in the concept of resurrection. And I'm somebody that constantly talks about how art imitates life. And so the notion of resurrection may be a human hope that you might be able to bring back a loved one that's passed away in an untimely fashion, or the notion of being able to see them again or be with them again that fuels that concept. But I do think that there is truth to resurrection, and I do think that some of it is rooted in magic, and I do think that there is a price to pay. So, all in all, when I consider the origins of the zombie, I think that it makes perfect sense that you would see an entity like this come into prominence during a time of upheaval and hardship and a lack of control among enslaved people. And I also could acknowledge that in some ways, it's kind of similar to the Christian concept of like purgatory or hell, like it's that fear of what happens to me in the afterlife and what happens if I don't get to control what I am, where I go, and how the rest of my eternity looks like. What does everlasting life mean if you don't get to control what it is? From a soul level. Yeah, I would say that that's probably the greatest fear of all is not death, but what happens if you don't get to control what happens to your soul or who your soul becomes or doesn't become, or what if you are locked away to a lifetime of hell and brimstone and fire, or the inability to control yourself, and so you're indebted to working as a zombie on a sugar plantation for the rest of your days. Um, yeah, I'd say that's pretty scary. Anyway, whew, I'm gonna wrap up this episode of our Caribbean Mystics deep dive, talking about the zombies. Check us next week. We are gonna keep moving right along with season 5. You please send in your stories if you have any stories. I would greatly, greatly, greatly appreciate it. It is how we are going to continue keeping this season going as long as possible. Um, Please consider signing up for Patreon. You do get the episodes early and they're ad free. And the money that you give on Patreon helps to keep the podcast moving forward. I have a lot of subscriptions I have to pay for, and things are very expensive. LOL. So, this has been another episode. I'm so grateful for everyone who has listened up until this point. Please comment, please like, please share so we can get this podcast out there. And I'll see you next week. Bye, guys. Thank you for listening to the Caribbean Mystics podcast. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone. And to make sure that you never miss a tale, follow or subscribe wherever you listen. We are always seeking true stories. If you or someone you know has had a supernatural encounter rooted in the Caribbean, I want to hear it. Send your story to CaribbeanMysticsPodcast@gmail.com. That's CaribbeanMysticsPodcast@gmail.com. For links and resources from today's episode, check the show notes. The Caribbean Mystics Podcast, Season 5, is written, produced, and hosted by me, Gabrielle Carrard. Until next time, stay curious and maybe leave a light on.